The architecture of covenantal fidelity. Introduction. The methodological crisis in Matthean interpretation. Few New Testament passages have provoked as much sustained theological controversy as Jesus' pronouncement regarding the Torah in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. For centuries, Western systematic theology, influenced by post-enlightenment categories and classical Protestant frameworks, has often interpreted Matthew through a Hellenistic and supersessionist perspective. In this framework, Jesus is depicted as a radical innovator who disrupts continuity with the Hebrew Scriptures, replacing the Mosaic Law with a new, lawless faith. The claim that Jesus fulfills the law is frequently interpreted as rendering it obsolete. Such interpretations disrupt the organic unity of the biblical covenants and obscure the progressive coherence of Scripture's redemptive narrative. To address these interpretive deficiencies, this essay adopts a historical critical methodology integrated with Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s Promise Plan Theology. By resituating Matthew 5:17 through 20, within its ancient Hebraic and covenantal context, this approach emphasizes the continuity and progressive development of God's redemptive purpose. It challenges interpretive models that impose artificial divisions between the testaments and seeks to recover the text's theological coherence by grounding exegesis in historical realities and the organic unity of the canonical narrative. A rigorous biblical theology requires re-anchoring the text within its ancient Hebraic environment. Through the lens of Kaiser's Promise Plan, Matthew's Gospel does not terminate the Sinai Covenant but instead brings it to its eschatological culmination. Recent scholarship has produced a range of alternative positions regarding Matthew 5:17 through 20. Interpreters such as R.T. France argue that Jesus fulfills the Mosaic Law by bringing its intended purpose to completion, thereby rendering its ritual aspects obsolete for the Church. Others emphasize the continuity of the law within the Jewish context but differ on whether the law remains binding for all followers of Jesus or is transformed in his teaching. Still others assert a strict antithesis between law and grace, drawing on certain Reformation readings. While engaging these perspectives, this essay centers on the concept of abolishment, considering relevant historical and political realities. In this context, Matthew's Gospel emerges as a robust intra-Jewish defense. Following the destruction of the Temple in 70 CE, some Jewish factions accused Messianic believers of lawlessness that provoked divine wrath. Matthew 5:17 through 20 directly addresses this accusation. By examining historical law abolishers during Jewish crises and employing restoration eschatology, the essay demonstrates that Jesus demands complete covenantal fidelity, guiding the Torah to its intended purpose within God's unfolding plan. Section 1. The Lexical Pivot. Re-evaluating Kataluo in the First Century Matrix. Debate concerning Matthew 5:17 through 20 typically focuses on the Greek word plerou, meaning to fulfill. Although this discussion is significant, the passage's structure highlights something else. In verses 17 through 19, plerou appears only once, whereas kataluo and luo, which denote abolishment or destruction, occur 3 times. Jesus twice denies coming to abolish the law or the prophets and warns that those who abolish or relax even the least of the commandments will be least in the kingdom of heaven. This repetition indicates that the primary concern is not simply fulfillment, but the accusation of abolishing the law. To fully grasp the significance of Jesus' statement, interpreters must examine the usage of these terms in Second Temple Jewish literature. The charge of abolishing the law carried considerable political and religious weight, recalling the Antiochian persecutions of the 2nd century BCE and the destruction of the Jerusalem Temple in 70 CE. Section 2. The Historical Archetypes, Hellenizers, Zealots, and Divine Wrath. These historical examples of abolishing the law provide key background for understanding the Matthean context. The first major use appears in Maccabean literature. In the early 2nd century BCE, Antiochus IV Epiphanes tried to erase Judaism through Hellenization. Jewish authors, however, saw the root of the crisis as internal. Jason, an unlawful high priest, undermined traditional customs by building a Greek gymnasium in Jerusalem. His actions are described as abolishing the temple service. This lawlessness resulted in divine justice and suffering. In contrast, righteous martyrs such as Eleazar refused to violate even minor commandments, asserting that such actions would abolish ancestral law. A second example comes from Josephus's account of the Jewish War. After the catastrophe of 70 CE, Josephus blames the radical Zealots for profaning the temple and abolishing ancestral laws. Their lawlessness caused Yahweh to leave the temple and allowed Roman forces to act as instruments of divine wrath. These archetypes of covenant infidelity, internal betrayal, and radical zealotry that lead to national disaster provide the polemical foil against which Matthew defends Jesus' movement. Section 3, the post-70, CE Matthean context and the intra-Jewish polemic. Matthew's Gospel, likely composed in the late 1st century CE, addresses the chaos following the temple's fall. The emerging Messianic Jewish movement, comprised of followers of a crucified Messiah who predicted the temple's destruction and welcomed Gentiles without full conversion, was blamed by others for lawlessness. We find charges against Jewish followers of Jesus, accusing them of neglecting Torah observance. Matthew 5:17 through 20 serves as a direct response to this polemic. The text connects the persecution described in the Beatitudes with the imperative for visible Torah-faithful deeds, which then transitions into Jesus' defense of the law. Rather than suggesting a shift from law to grace, Matthew positions the Messianic community within the ongoing Jewish debate over covenant fidelity. Jesus warns that those who relax even the least commandment will be least in the kingdom and insists, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. It is Jesus' followers, rather than their detractors, who embody authentic covenant faithfulness. This surpassing righteousness finds concrete expression in the Beatitudes as kingdom practices, participative grace habits of mercy, purity, peacemaking, and endurance. Section 4, Restoration Eschatology and the True Interpretation of the Torah. To discern how Jesus upholds and intensifies the Torah, it is necessary to consider restoration eschatology. During the Second Temple period, many Jews understood Israel's ongoing exile as the result of covenant infidelity. Restoration was contingent upon Israel's return to Yahweh through obedience. Within this framework, Jesus appears as the eschatological herald who instructs the community in the path of the Promise Plan. This approach challenges interpretations that position Jesus against the law in Matthew 5:21 through 48. The statements in verses 17 through 20 indicate that what follows cannot contradict what Jesus has just affirmed. Jesus contrasts the Torah with mistaken interpretations his audience had heard. He interprets one command in light of another to clarify the Torah's purpose, for example, relating murder to anger or adultery to lust. Even the command to love your enemies corrects a false addition rather than the original command. These teachings, grounded in typological and figural interpretation, demonstrate Jesus advancing the Torah toward its divinely intended goal. Rather than abolishing the law, he actualizes its true purpose. The surpassing righteousness described in verse 20 is realized within the Spirit-enabled New Covenant community, which embodies the practical, grace-infused ethics articulated in the Beatitudes. Section 5. The Promise Plan and the Non-Supersessionist Reality. Recovering Matthew 5:17 through 20 within its original context has significant implications for biblical theology. Interpreting Matthew within its Hebraic context preserves the non-supersessionist reality of the kingdom. Jesus, as the Jewish Messiah and last Adam, exemplifies perfect covenant fidelity. By affirming the Torah's enduring validity, he secures the historical promises to Israel. The New Covenant does not annul the Torah but internalizes it, enabling obedience through the Spirit. Gentile inclusion represents gracious grafting into Israel's olive tree without ethnic erasure, expanding the covenant while preserving its concrete promises. Paul echoes this logic. Do we then overthrow the law by this faith, By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. Implications for contemporary theology. This interpretation urges contemporary theology to move beyond simplistic law versus grace dichotomies and to advance a robust vision of covenantal fidelity empowered by grace. It equips seminary students and pastors to articulate kingdom ethics as active participation in the Promise Plan, fulfilling the Torah's central intent amid cultural pressures while resisting both legalism and antinomianism. For both Messianic Jewish and Gentile believers, this approach fosters unity within the one people of God, while preserving Israel's distinctive role in the unfolding redemptive narrative. Practically, this reshapes church preaching by encouraging congregations to view adherence to the ethical teachings of the Sermon on the Mount not as legalistic observance but as the result of hearts renewed and aligned with the Spirit. In discipleship, study groups may examine how the call to greater righteousness invites believers to embody compassion, justice, and faithfulness in daily life. In interfaith dialogue, leaders can engage Jewish communities with genuine respect for the enduring covenant and commandments. Conclusion. By restoring Matthew 5:17 through 20 to its first-century Jewish context, this essay demonstrates that the Matthean Jesus positions himself in opposition to historical archetypes of covenant infidelity while affirming his mission to fulfill the Torah. Through authoritative exposition, he calls for a surpassing heart-level righteousness that realizes rather than nullifies the law's intent. The Messiah secures the redemptive narrative, upholding irrevocable promises to ethnic Israel while expanding the covenant to reclaim the nations and summoning all humanity to faithful obedience within the restored cosmic temple.